those who produce are not the ones who appropriate the products or the value of their production. So those of us who go to our shitty job on Monday and sit through a meeting and then go and do a spreadsheet and do this, that, and the other thing, we know it's bullshit. We know it's not important, and we know that it isn't benefiting us as much as we are benefiting the people that we work for. That's why oftentimes we, kind of slack off. We don't really want to go. We call in, is because at the end of the day, we are working for someone else. Our labor is being purchased, just like any technology, just like any tool that can be used to produce a good. Our labor force is being purchased and used for the benefit of another class. Para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando. ¡Viva la revolución! Well, I'm glad to have you back on the show, my friend. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, what's up, everybody? So my name is Ramiro Sebastián Funes. I'm a Honduran communist content creator based in Los Angeles, California. Shout out to LA, to Cali. I'm born and raised in New York. Out to LA a few years ago and have been creating content for several years. Recently, a few months ago, launched the documentary Nicaragua Against Empire. I also do a regular podcast stream called Unmasking Imperialism that you can also check out on my channel. And you can check out my channel by just typing in Ramiro Sebastián Funes. I know it's a long Latino Fabi name, but if you type in Ramiro, it'll be the first one that comes up usually. So
yeah, and please go check out all of Ramiro's stuff. It's dope, and I'm always super excited to have you on the show. And I'm super excited to do this episode because I think it's pretty prevalent to life right now for just about everyone throughout the pandemic. Kind of feelings of depression, isolation, kind of loneliness. And then we get to this topic, which, some have talked about before. I think I've seen some YouTube videos about it, but alienation, which is a really important topic right now and an incredibly important topic in Marxism. So I'm glad to have you on to talk about this. So right off the bat, my friend, I just want to ask you, what is alienation and why do we feel it is so widespread and prevalent today?
alienation, first of all, is a economic term. I think that's important to mention because a lot of the psychoanalysis or postmodern folks will try to divorce it from economics. And I even hear some people on the right wing trying to use the word alienation, which is really interesting because, on the one hand, it's good that more people are using it, that more people are familiar with the term, because I think it's something that a lot of people are going through. But on the other hand, we also want to make sure our terms and definitions are correct and that they're not being used in a false or incorrect way. And so alienation is an economic term that is first used in Capital, Volume 1 of Marx, published in the mid 1800s. Again, Capital is Marx's seminal work where he outlines the basic mechanics of capital and capitalism, explains very scientifically how value is exploited and taken from the working class around the world in favor of the capitalist class. And this term alienation makes its first appearance in Marx and Capital, and it's rooted in economics. And this is so important to understand our current alienation in 2021. Alienation, in the economic sense, as Marx outlines, is the separation of the value of the worker's product from the worker himself or herself. In other words, if you walk down if you don't walk down New York City, if you've ever been to New York or any other major city of the global capitalist system, Paris, London, LA. You walk down and you see these huge skyscrapers. You might even see a building that says Trump on it, or Marriott, or Ritz Carlton, or the names of these wealthy people. And on appearance, while these buildings bear the names of millionaires and billionaires who run the country, and it seems to be in appearance their possession, in essence, those buildings are the value that was created from the working class. The steel was probably taken from Asia, from China, or Chile, or any other steel producing country. The rubber that was used for parts of the building was taken from the Philippines. The tools that were made with iron were taken from the Middle East. The gas that's used to heat up the building is taken from oil producing countries. The people who built them, especially in huge mega cities like New York or London, or are usually South Asian, or Mexican, Latino. And so it's a culmination of labor and resources from exploited global South peoples, both in the global South and in the diaspora. And that value of the working class is extracted, is alienated, is separated from those who created it, right? Because it wasn't, if we take the example of like a Trump building in New York, it's not like Trump himself built the building. It was used with the raw materials that were extracted from the global South and created by workers from the exploited global South. And so that value that is finalized in this product called a skyscraper, or even other materials technology, iPhone, for example, that is separated from the workers who produce that wealth, because without those workers producing that, there would be no skyscraper, there would be no iPhone. And so that's really what alienation is. It's the separation of working people from the products of their creation. And under capitalism, as Marx says, capitalism, the producers bow down before their products. Those who create the wealth bow down before the products of their creation, and it seems like to take on a life of its own. And around this time, we're talking about Frankenstein, the popularity of this idea of scientists creating these huge monsters that they lose control of. And that's what alienation is in the economic sense, the value that is created by the working class, but is not under the control of the working class and is used and appropriated by the capitalist. And this lack of ownership over the products of your creation not only separates you physically from your product, but it also separates you from your labor. It makes you not want to produce or work, or want to go into work on a Monday morning or a Tuesday morning, because we all subconsciously know that when we're taking that commute to work, when we're in a meeting for work, we know that we're producing value for something that's not our own. It's a different feeling when it's the weekend and you're cleaning your house or you're fixing something. You have, even if it's a little garden or something that's yours, and you're building it and you're working it, it doesn't, it's work, but it doesn't feel like work, because that value is being redirected back into your chain of energy, your possessions. And under capitalism, it's the opposite. You're producing wealth for somebody else. And so that is the economic basis for alienation, and maybe later on we can get into some of the psychological effects of that.
Hell yeah, that was a very great and concise way to explain everything. And you made the the point that again, the producers bow down before their products. In Capital, Marx goes into great lengths to not fantasize or theorize a future society that can break away from capitalism, but to understand the scientific nature, the law of motion, and the principles of capitalism and capital. And one of the most important things to recognize with capitalism is it is a system which exists in a class society wherein, as you said, those who produce are not the ones who appropriate the products or the value of their production. So those of us who go to our shitty job on Monday and sit through a meeting and then go and do a spreadsheet and do this, that, and the other thing. We know it's bullshit. We know it's not important, and we know that it isn't benefiting us as much as we are benefiting the people that we work for. That's why oftentimes we, kind of slack off. We don't really want to go. We call in, is because at the end of the day, we are working for someone else. Our labor is being purchased, just like any technology, just like any tool that can be used to produce a good. Our labor force is being purchased and used for the benefit of another class. And therefore, as a whole, the working class is without the products of its own labor. They are without the value of their production. And that's why the gap between the rich and the poor is so incredible, because as production ramps up, as we have technology that can produce more efficiently and effectively, as we continue into more and more consumerism, the global market expanding and inflating, we have more and more of this wealth inequality that builds, because as we know, as wealth grows, so too does poverty. So would you like to? I'm kind of going to spitball off to the script a little bit here, but would you like to talk a little bit about why it is that as more wealth is produced, so too more poverty is produced?
The reason that wealth and poverty go hand in hand under capitalism is because of the fundamental interactions of capital that take place on a day-to-day basis that create a negative spiral downward exploitative system. So what do I mean by that? So in Capital, Marx talks about chains or specters of transactions. So if you ever read Capital, you'll see the letters CMC or MCM written in the book. And C stands for commodity and money, and M stands for money. And these are the interactions that guide everything. Think about it. You wake up in the morning to go to work, you go to your local bodega or your local coffee or Starbucks place, you're in possession of money, right? You're in possession of this value, this money, and you're exchanging it for a commodity, which is the coffee. And in exchange, the Starbucks or the bodega or whatever it is that you're buying coffee from gets the money, and they're relinquishing their commodity. Now, when we go into the workplace, there's the opposite relationship. Once we get to work, sometimes late, right? We are working. We ourselves as humans are the commodity. We're the ones that bring the value. We're the items of value, and it's sick to even say it like that because capitalism views us that way and as a commodity. But our labor is a commodity because we work X amount of hours, we perform X amount of functions, and in exchange for that commodity, we're being given money or M. And so these are the day to day ways of understanding interactions under capitalism. M, it's either M to C, money to commodity, or C to M, commodity for money. And the reason that wealth and poverty are baked into capitalism is because in each of those single transactions, there is a level of exploitation. There's a hidden level of exploitation called surplus value. And it's baked into every single transaction that happens every second of every day of every year. By the time I finish the sentence, there would have already been millions of people around the world whose labor has been exploited in the time that we're talking now. And the reason for that is because every single financial transaction under capitalism is not done on an equal basis. And I think this is what most people on the right fail to understand is that there's no such thing as free trade. There's no such thing as an equal to equal interaction under capitalism because when you're buying a commodity with money, The capitalists view it as, and this is what explains in Capital, that the line of exploitation goes MCM, money to commodity to money. So what does that mean? You have a certain amount of money, right? You have wages that you're going to pay somebody to create a commodity, or you're going to buy them their labor as a commodity to produce a commodity, to then sell that and then get more money, right? So as a workers, as part of the working class, we're not we're getting money to buy commodities for ourselves to live, right? We're getting money and a wage to buy food, to drive our car, to get gas, to purchase things that have direct use value, right? This is what Marx calls use value. These are things that we directly use in our day-to-day basis: our stove, our electrical, our car to get to work. Now, there are things that have exchange value, and this is where the capitalists exploit. They buy something like a house to then resell it at a higher price and make a profit. And that margin of profit allows them to continue over and over and over and over again to buy more wages, to buy more stuff. And that endless cycle of accumulation is what creates more and more surplus value that creates a division between capital and labor that is so essential to understanding, because under capitalism it's not labor for labor. We're not It's not like mutual aid, it's not like bartering. Exchanges are done with the intention of making a profit. For example, Fruit of the Loom or Haynes doesn't go to Mexico or Haiti or Bolivia to start a factory and create shirts and a textile factory just to break even. They go there to make a profit because they know they can pay the workers a cheaper wage. They know that they can pay cheaper supplies, have less labor regulations, and they make a higher and higher surplus value profit. And this is surplus value. This is the hidden secret of capitalism. This is baked in. So that's why a lot of people on the right, in terms of economics, especially the libertarians, I mean, they completely fail to understand this. Is that it's impossible for everyone to be a billionaire. That's logistically impossible. Just as you can't have hot without cold, you can't have rich without poor, because they're two dialectical opposites in one totality. It's like a magnet, right? You can't have a north pole without a south pole. And this is baked into the capitalist system. And as more interactions happen, I gave you the example of the MCCM relationship: money, commodity, commodity to money. Those interactions, in each of those interactions, there is a level of exploitation, and those acts of exploitation are happening every second of every day and multiplying over more and more and more. And Marx uses a term called metabolism. The metabolism of capitalism is speeding up as capitalism gets bigger and expands and markets. You have iPhones all over the world, McDonald's, Burger King. You have capital speeding up, more exploitation, more huge amounts of wealth, and more poverty around the world. And this is the metabolism of capitalism leading to expanded wealth and expanded exploitation. Even in the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen this for ourselves within the last year and a half, that are more there are a handful of billionaires that have multiplied their wealth by tenfold, 11-fold, and there are also more unemployed people in the retail sector, people in the so-called unskilled labor sector. And so these two opposites are expanding farther apart from each other like a rubber band, right? It's kind of like, when you're a kid and you have like a broken rubber band that's like ripped in half, and you grab each side with one hand and you see how far you can go and stretch it without it breaking. So we're doing that. Capitalism has been doing that for the past 100 years, and we're almost at that point where it's about to snap and hit us in the face. So that's really the mechanics of capitalism, and why the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer.
And I think right there you show very, importantly, that in this situation, the exploitation and the kind of appropriation of the value from the working class, that stretching that is causing more and more poverty for the working class, when that rubber band snaps, it's not going to snap and hit the ruling class in the face. It's going to snap and hit the working class in the face because, as we see every time there is a, and I was even writing about this today, you have so many different terms for it, but you got a bust, panic, a crisis, a recession, a depression, but it all means the same thing. And Engels and Marx talked about this 150 years ago when they were saying that every 5 to 10 years, capitalism has a natural tendency to collapse. It overproduces, and eventually it gets to a point where the products it has created can not be bought for a profit, and therefore they have put out more money that they're taking back in, and in that moment production stops, jobs get sent out of the country, people get fired, and because of the scale excuse me, because of the scale that capitalism has taken, and because of its capture of the state power, you now also have, um, as things like the 2008 crisis, you have huge bailouts for corporations coming out of the taxpayers' dollars. So you have social services getting cut, you have government spending being directed towards military contracts and bailouts for banks. Then you do going towards things like assistance programs for single mothers like WIC, or any kind of state programs that help, battered women, transgender folks, and people suffering that kind of trauma. These are all things that we could have, that other states, use as a tool to tamper down the working class's anger. But here in the United States, it's kind of, when you start paying attention, it's capitalism in its barest face, just doing its best to try to act like it's not exposed. I wanted to read just real quick an excerpt from Michael Parenti's The Face of Imperialism. He's citing, I can't remember the guy's name. He's citing a guy by the name of Elich, Elich. He says, in Bangladesh, workers sew garments for Disney and Walmart, earning the princely sum of 11 to 20 cents per hour. The pay is so abysmal that four workers must share a single shack, and one outpost and water pump serves 60 people. Meals consist of nothing but rice, only occasionally flavored with a small amount of beans or potatoes. To manage even such a meager diet as this, workers must borrow money each week. The work week is 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. If a worker is caught talking in the factory, he is fined a day's wage. Quote, it is a bleak life. We have no hope, confessed one worker. Another complained, quote, we have no life. We can't afford to marry. We have no wife, no social life. We live just to work. Um, this is, again, that was Disney and Walmart, who are causing that exploitation. We here in the United States both get to pretend as if we are a part of the ruling class by sharing in some of the crumbs that trickle down, such as our iPhone, or going on vacation, or consumerism of any sort, like going to big shopping malls and spending a bunch of money. All of that, all of the privileges that we have here in the imperial core are predicated on the oppression and exploitation of the rest of the world. And the more privileges we expect to have in the imperial core, the more intense and the more spread out the exploitation is, the more people that are going to be exploited, and the more intense they are going to be exploited. Um, and I just think that when we hear folks who are not anti-capitalist speak about capitalism, there's such an immense ignorance that is there, and their own understanding of their own exploitation is just bleakly absent. And so I think what is really incredible is capital's ability to reorganize and reconcentrate itself. And you mentioned how during the pandemic, a bunch of billionaires have made off with a shit ton of money. And it's because as capitalism hits certain crisis periods, we know capital has to centralize, it has to concentrate wealth. So you have huge mergers between corporations, you have stocks that are sold off to individuals who have the money to buy them. And you have all kinds of things like there's a bunch of I don't think it's banks, but there's a bunch of corporations that are going around buying up all the vacant houses in the United States. Um, and by doing this, they are bringing incredible amounts of wealth to very, very few amounts of people. And this is another point of capitalism that's incredibly important to understand. As as the wealthy get wealthier, they become fewer and fewer and begin swallowing up one another. And as they do that, they send more and more people down into the working class and into the opposite side of the scale between the owning class and the working class. Um, and we are getting to a point today where there are so many people who have to suffer some form of kind of I don't really know how to put it, but they have to live a life that we shouldn't. They have to work a shit ton of hours. They have to live in shitty apartments. They have to basically live their life through social media because they can't afford to go out and do anything with their friends. They have to kind of avoid spending money, so they end up living, some depressing lives. And a lot of this, is getting to a point where the contradictions between the life we're told we're supposed to be able to live and the life many of us live, I feel became incredibly heightened during the pandemic. And I think that more people than before the pandemic seem to have, at least at a bare minimum, a mindset that capitalism is at least not quote unquote good. Um, I I think that this is a decent enough starting point, but I think there's more here to understand. So I wanted to ask you, why do we need to have a materialist understanding of capitalism and especially as we're discussing of alienation? And do you maybe want to hit real quickly just what materialism kind of is in a succinct definition type of way?
Definitely. So, first, starting off with the materialist world outlook, materialism, the philosophy of ontology. Ontology in philosophy is the study of reality, how the universe works, what determines reality. Is it our minds? Is it objective reality? Is it something that is in the material world? And materialists, given the name, believe that or know that that objective reality is determined by material beings or material relationships in real life, as opposed to the ideas that we have in our head. And we've all heard the famous expression, I think, therefore I am. Materialists take the opposite approach and say, I am, therefore I think. Being determines consciousness, not consciousness determines being. So this is different from a lot of the mindset of idealism, which is prevalent in capitalism, but also in many religions as well, that believe in a separate higher power that exists in a realm independent from us, that believe that our souls or our minds are separate from our bodies. As materialists, we understand scientifically that material conditions determine our consciousness. Without blood, without our heart, without our lungs, without soil, without clean air, we wouldn't be able to think the things that we think. We wouldn't be able to have feelings because we are extensions of nature. We're not independent of and separate from nature. We are an extension of nature. And we ultimately are ruled by material reality. So that's how materialists view the world. That's the Feuerbach, who was a German philosopher who pioneered this understanding and greatly influenced Marx as well. And this is important because, again, going back to what we were talking about, alienation is becoming a more popular term. And I think COVID-19, like you said as well, really made this aware to people around the world. It was a moment, and it still is to a certain degree, where everybody was forced to stay inside. Everybody was forced to be isolated, to be separated. But people who work low wage jobs, undocumented immigrants, the most oppressed of the oppressed, who are relegated to some of the harshest occupations in the world, already experience that isolation. A lot of the isolation that most people feel today was already felt by immigrants, by the poorest of the poor, who do nothing but work 2 or 3 jobs a day, interact with nobody. Maybe they clean. I remember living in New York and going to NYU. I remember seeing and talking with this one lady who was a janitor, and she would just clean buildings at like the middle of the night, 2, 3 in the morning, right? She would just clean buildings, nobody else. It would just be her and her mop and her cleaning supplies. Imagine how alienating that is, not being able to talk to anybody, not having a workplace culture, not being, and it's, mind you, in the middle of the night, so it's not even like you're on a regular sleep schedule. That has a horrible psychological impact. That literally fucks with your head. That does not make you a sane human being, and no human being should have to live under that. It's the same thing if you work in retail, if you work in certain different jobs where your full potentials as a human being are not developed or unleashed. Instead, you're forced to do the same repetitive task over and over and over and over and over and over again, not developing you as a human, but just performing a small task to produce capital and surplus value for somebody who has no even familiarity with the work that you do. And this is the materialist understanding of alienation, because it is rooted in economics. It is rooted in the system that's in place now of capitalism, that promotes individualism, that promotes profit, that worships profit at the end of the day. Because I think that one of the best ways to really think about it is people over profit, right? Because under capitalism, profit is over people. We human lives accommodate profit. People's If we lived in a socialist society, every human being would be the measure of success in terms of literacy rates, healthcare, access to housing, how good people live, right? Buen vivir, as they say in some countries, especially in Latin America. That is the measure, the true GDP, or the true wealth of a nation. And instead, under capitalism, wealth is measured by this thing called profit that we worship, that is on the dollar bill, that is worshipped as like a separate religion. That is seen as the measure of wealth in society. It's separate from human beings, even though human beings created the system of capitalism. And that is the materialist basis for understanding alienation. And that's why it's important for Marxist communists of all strands to begin talking about this discourse, because there's so many YouTube channels out there. I've watched them, I follow them all the time, that talk about how Gen Z is like the most sexless generation, how like the Gen Z is like, I especially feel bad for Gen Z, because they're talking about like how Gen Z is like a lot of the young, especially young men who are addicted to video games and playing, it's just staying inside. And even think about it, like I was born 1991, so I'm millennial, and my generation, we grew up playing in the street. Like I grew up hanging out with my friends outside on the block. I grew up with the generation that when cars would pass, we yell car, and then we'd come back, we'd play, even if it was like a can, we'd play soccer with that. Like we would be creative, we weren't glued to our smartphones, hunched over and interacting with people we've never met on a plastic device that we work our entire lives to pay the bill for. And this is, again, not to blame the individual people, but this is to blame the system of capitalism that has created alienation, has created this. Because people don't even know how to interact with each other anymore. People are separated and isolated. People don't hang out anymore. Like I was just talking about this with my girlfriend yesterday, that I can't name a single person that I know who hasn't said, "Hey, I'm like feeling lonely. I'm feeling depressed. This pandemic or quarantine has me feeling alone." And I think a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people feel alone. A lot of people feel isolated. And the irony, the contradiction, right, using Marxist terms, is that we're more connected than ever. I can hit you up now through IG, through WhatsApp, through Facebook, through Twitter, through so many ways. Yet the irony is that because of the state of the economy, because of crises that are created under capitalism, we won't have the same meaningful interaction because of that separation. Because I can't fly out to New York right now and chill with you because I have to go to work tomorrow. I have
Boo.
bill I have bills to pay, so I can't. And those are I know people who, like, even kids I went to school with whose parents weren't even able to go to their graduation because they had to work. They were undocumented, or if they even missed one day of work, they weren't able to keep their job. So alienation is a product of capitalism, and that's why it's important for Marxists to take this opportunity, as everyone talks about COVID-19 and the rise of like incelibacy, the rise of like the quote unquote incelibacy, the rise of like video game addiction, porn addiction, the TikTok, all this stuff, right? As this conversation is happening worldwide, we have to come out there with our analysis and say this is rooted in the economic system we have, and we have to change our economic system in a way that we're producing value. We receive all the value of our work, of our labor. Imagine if under a socialist system now we get paid, or we are able to sustain ourselves by having a little plot of land that we grow crops on and grow and take care of, and we share part of that with people who need food. And this is what they're doing in other countries. I saw this firsthand in Nicaragua. They're doing this in Venezuela and Cuba. And socialism can provide that outlet for a way out for community, for social interaction, purpose. And that's why so many people online, especially young men, are moving to the right, because the right is unfortunately capitalizing on this and saying that these white supremacist militias, or whatever, Proud Boys or whatever it is, they provide that sense of community in real life that nobody else is offering. And so I think it's just something to keep in mind, and that's something I've been trying to do as well. Like, I got off of IG, and I'm only on Facebook in true boomer fashion. I'm not on Twitter, IG, or TikTok, but I'm trying to do more stuff in real life, organize in real life, and just have more in-person interactions, because I think that is so important to combating alienation. But ultimately it comes down to changing the overthrowing the capitalist system.
Hell yeah. Um, and to your point also about like folks having to miss out on things like graduations and shit like that to work. Um, I think that most of us have to deal with that to some extent because, like, if we lived in a system where labor was for necessity, where human needs like food, shelter, healthcare, things like that were just a guaranteed right as a human being, and you labor now instead of just to make a shit ton of money for some asshole, you labor because either A, something needs to be done in your community, like some kind of project or something like that that people participate in, or B, you're short on cash and you need to go and make a little bit of money. Now, that's not to say that under a socialist system, we're all just going to be dicking around, walking around in these pretty parks and everything and just having the time of our life. If we look at Cuba, if we look at Nicaragua, if we look at Burkina Faso, if we look at China, if we look at the Philippines and all these different countries that are trying in different forms to self-determine, to build a socialist society, you recognize that in fact, more now than ever, everyone's hands need to be on deck. Places that start building a socialist society, they work towards what is called full employment. And that is something that capitalism could never have, because as long as we have the um, the mainstay uh, idle army of unemployed people, it holds down things like minimum wage. Because if there's on average 30 to 50 million Americans who go without a job every single year, then keeping the federal minimum wage at 7.25 is no problem, because as soon as people go on strikes, as soon as people join unions, as soon as people try to organize around a higher wage, there's opportunities to fire them and bring in scabs of some sort, or just simply people who, not scabs even necessarily, but just people who need money and aren't making any. And so this is one way that the working class is used against one another to further alienation. And this causes and sows huge divisions, kind of like you're talking about having the young white men going to the far right. It's because so much of the kind of mentality that they hold on to, the perspective and the world that they want to have, is the same world that has been, which is a world that is built for them, built for white men. Uh, and so when that world is being changed, where black, brown, and indigenous people are fighting for their liberation in a world where LGBTQ plus folks are pointing out the incredible inequality and discrimination that exists in not only just the United States, but the world in general. And they are not willing to accept that this is the way the world is going, this is the way the world should be going, because they in a lot of cases, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, feel themselves connected to the power structure and feel themselves to be on the top side of that power structure. And so as these things develop, they feel as if their little bit of power that they have, because they are so lacking in self-esteem, they are so lacking in relationships, they are so lacking in any kind of power whatsoever, they have to have egotistical power. And so this leads to things like rampant sexism, transphobia, racism, acts of violence. This is what oftentimes leads to things like school shootings or church bombings and stuff, is white people, white men, seeing their hegemonic control within white supremacist patriarchal societies being brought to question, and they're not willing to accept that. And so as the contradictions between this old society start developing to somewhat of a newer one, where different ideologies are trying to wage a struggle against the dominant one, you see fits of kind of reaction to that. And I think this is incredibly important to know and to understand, because this is the reality that you and I, especially here in the United States, but around the world, are going to be experiencing as climate crisis becomes more and more intensified, as the continuation of what is being called a job shortage, which is actually just a wage shortage, and ultimately a lack of power, a power shortage, because the workers are not in control of their own labor and of their own value. And the culmination of that with the pandemic, which for a majority of the world is still raging on as it was in the beginning, um, we see a whole lot of reaction happening all over the place. I think that here in the Imperial Core, we get the ability to pretend like that doesn't exist. We're off fighting democracy. We're not fighting for democracy here, because fighting for democracy here would mean the people who are signing the checks to send people to go fight for democracy across the lake wouldn't be in charge anymore, because that is just the system that we have to endure. But we get to pretend like that shit isn't happening and again, like we were talking about before, enjoy a little bit of the crumbs, a little bit more privileges than the rest. But that too is slowly but surely being bled out. Um, I think I just real quick, I I know I've been kind of rambling here, but I just finished Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher. Have you ever read it?
I haven't actually. No. How is it?
It was really good. For anybody who is feeling isolated, is feeling depressed, anybody who just seems like, who feels like there is no hope, there's nothing that can change. Um, Albeit the book is kind of, um, I don't want to say dark, but it is it is shaking. It is it'll bring you kind of to the central understanding of how shitty the world actually is. But it's really cool because it gives you a clarity of understanding how this feeling of hopelessness, that there can be nothing to come that is better. He opens up his book by saying, I think it's a Slavoj Žižek quote, where he says it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. And he kind of
Mm.
expounds on that as his argument goes throughout the book about why we today have, not by our own individual want, but along with our own individual participation, have created almost a self fulfilling prophecy for ourselves. We become more and more alienated, making us more and more hopeless, separating us more from one another, creating more division between us and the product of our labor, rising inequality and things like that. And we look around and we just go, there's no way it can get better. The book talks about also how we are living in a world that can't create anything new. Every movie that comes out is a sequel. Every album is sampling songs that came out 30 years ago and getting sued by those people so that they can make the extra buck because all of them are working at fucking Walmart now. You got all kinds of different foods that are just not food being produced, just filled with sugar and fat and all kinds of disgusting things. You got every single ad on TV, every single thing that you can think of just being a replication of another. And he expounds on how this too creates that feeling of hopelessness. But then the issue becomes that all the organizations, all the struggles that are taking place in the imperial cores, they are centering themselves on that trauma and creating a negative feedback loop where they say, well, nothing can get better, so we're not going to do anything to try to make it better, and therefore nothing will get better because we feel so incredibly hopeless. We feel as if nothing can be done, that we just simply and plainly try to capitulate to the system. We just ask for reforms. We ask for higher wages. We ask for shorter hours, completely ignoring that every time that a struggle like that has successfully been done, not only has it been almost immediately taken away, but usually it leads to the laying off of millions of workers. Again, jobs being sent out of the country, inflation, housing gets more expensive. All these things that we are supposed to have because we work and pay our taxes to fund this imperial empire, we see disappearing in front of us. And so we just want some of the crumbs. We just want to grab whatever we can. But we have to stop doing that. We have to stop organizing in that way. And we have to start building revolutionary organizations which cultivate a future, which build hope, which connect people instead of dividing them, and which ultimately says, yeah, does capitalism really suck? Definitely. Is it destroying the earth? Oh, yeah, for sure. But sitting around and posting about it on Facebook, or going and joining the DSA and having a debate group, or reading Capital by yourself, at your house and just recording a podcast about it, that is not going to change the reality we are living in. So, if we want to change that reality, Mark Fisher says, as many before him have said, is we cannot give in to reforms, we cannot give in to revisionism, we have to be revolutionary. So, I wanted to ask you, after all of that, um, how does kind of the alienation and depoliticization that we see today, kind of combined with the economic hardships that come from late stage capitalism, again, the wealth gap that's being created, and social and political persecution, leave folks open to right wing, conservative, chauvinistic ideas? We already kind of hit on that. But I would like to twist that also and say, how do you feel we can begin organizing around these things and trying to combat these?
Yeah, that's a great point. This is something that has to be combated in real life. And I went through a moment where I said, okay, the internet and social media are the new forms of interaction. If you would have asked me a few years ago, I would have said that because of the trend. But I've changed my position. I agree, just like you. I think that things have to be done more in real life. Get off the keyboard and walk outside and work in your community and see what the issues are directly in your community. And that's more or less the approach that I've taken recently, because a lot of people are cozy just doing stuff online, which is good and an important part of that. But I think it's important to do stuff in real life. And this is another way of combating alienation, is having a family and a community by joining a group in your area, by getting involved in real life events. You're also eliminating that isolation, that feeling of not having a family or a community, because we are people who want to interact. Humans are social beings. We're not isolated individuals. We want to be part of communities. And that's why you have all of these weird subcultures that emerge online. And I find them really fascinating, to be honest with you. I'm somebody who will, a lot of times on YouTube, will jump into random communities online, and not necessarily out of complete adherence to the group, but just out of like seeing like who are the people that are part of this community and why. And so much of it is alienation. I think everyone, to a certain degree, is cognizant of the fact that alienation is worse than ever before under capitalism, but they're just unaware of why it's happening or how to combat it. And so I think in terms of combating it, one of the ways is a to definitely get involved in local community stuff that's directly impacting you and people around you, as well as internationally, any causes that are near and dear to you, of people around the world who are fighting against imperialism. And by doing so, you become part of something bigger than yourself. You are able to have a group of people or a family that can interact with, that you can socialize with, and using technology efficiently in that sense. Not just being, don't let technology control you. Don't let social media control you and determine what you're going to watch. You determine how you're going to use social media. The way we're, like, we've never met in person, but we've used social media and media in general efficiently to have this conversation now and to actually have productive dialogue. And being moving away from being just passive consumers of media to active producers is designed to create more in real life changes. And this is something that I think is really important. But yeah, I just wanted to end it there.
Word, man. I think everything you said is incredibly important. I mean, if we are if we are using our heads well, then we understand that there is no thing that is truly bad or truly good. So things like socialism, or socialism, geez Louise, things like social media, and kind of the internet, although they have incredible negative effects to uh, some extent, as in they do sometimes feed this tendency to kind of separate. They do sometimes feed the the kind of isolation, even though we think we're looking for community. Sometimes we kind of, especially on like Facebook, you see folks just find a community that supports everything that they believe, and helps them to kind of concretize their own views and just kind of feed their own ego. That's not better, and that's not good in comparison to isolation. They're both bad. Social media in this way and technology, as you said, should be used for organizing. It should be used to try to have important conversations. It should be used to try to connect with people. And we will, obviously, technology rules the world. So we can't 100% live a life without technology. And anyone who's kind of pushing that line is boomerish, but like
Yeah.
I think that also a lot of us get lost in the specters. We get lost in the distractions that come up, the crumbs, and we can't be reformist. Many revolutionaries have said it, that when you want to wage a struggle, and we want to wage a class struggle, meaning that we as the working class want to overthrow the ruling class and install the dictatorship of the proletariat, meaning that the working class is in charge again of its own labor, is in control and appropriates its own value, and is able to wield and use those things, value and labor, for the benefit of the many instead of the few. Um, so if we want to build something like that, we have to build it correctly. Like a house, we have to build the foundation solidly. And if we want to get to our goal, then we have to wage that struggle conclusively to its very end, to its logical conclusion. Meaning, we can't just simply ask for a Bernie Sanders presidency. We can't just simply ask for workers' cooperatives like Richard Wolff is pushing. We can't
Right.
just simply ask for higher wages or taxes on billionaires. We have to demand, and if not receive, take a society which is built for the working class by the working class and is able to build a better tomorrow for the whole world. Um, Saying that, my friend, is there anything you'd like to say before we close up? I want to say first, thank you so much for coming on. I love this conversation. I love having you on. But is there anything you would like to say before you go?
No, I think you said put it pretty well. I think something that came to mind as you were talking is the same way that the bourgeoisie is carrying out the great economic reset, which they're calling it. We need a socialist economic reset, a complete restructuring of the global financial system away from capitalism. No more reforms, no more cosmetic changes. We should get to a point immediately where we address the international emergencies of climate change, poverty, hunger, homelessness. We can get rid of these things within days if we really put our minds to it as human beings. And that's exactly what we need: a socialist economic reset, socialist revolution, not reform. And it's a pleasure to be on, man. I hope to chat with you again. Always great to speak with you.
Hell yeah, my friend. Long live the people's struggle. Thanks for having on. I hope you and your loved ones are good, my friend. Stay safe. And I am excited to record with you again.
Thank you so much, brother. Take care.
All right, peace out.